I can't tell you exactly where, but in the middle of nowhere in the southwestern United States, there's a supermax prison that I'll call Ashurst State Penitentiary, or ASP for short. That's not its real name, but it'll do. Now, as with most maximum security prisons, there are some genuinely sick people there. Murderers, psychopaths, rapists. You know, the kinds of people who can probably never be allowed back into society. A lot of people claim that it simply isn't possible to escape from this prison, and maybe they're right. I really hope that they are. Not because I'm afraid of the sickos they've got in the cells. I mean, I am, of course I am, but even the most disturbed serial-killing necrophiliacs they've got in there don't scare me as much as what they've got in their basement. I don't think most of the regular staff is fully aware of the prison's other inmates. I've heard rumors that some of the guards are aware that something is up, but they either don't care or know better than to ask questions. I imagine they probably think it's some government lab or something, running experiments that may or may not be entirely ethical on convicted felons. Some people would say that might arguably be preferable to the truth. They have your standard security procedures, of course. For starters, inmates aren't allowed to have any contact with each other. Some of them are not permitted to leave their cells, and those that are only do so under heavy guard. There are no common areas, there is no yard, and every inch of the place is under heavy surveillance. The whole basement complex is surrounded by 20 feet of reinforced concrete and runs deep beneath the prison itself. Digging your way out simply isn't an option. There's only one elevator that goes down into the basement complex of ASP, and it only moves if you've got a valid passcode and keycard. On top of that, the elevator is monitored on both ends. If anything goes wrong, the elevator gets shut down, nobody enters that complex, and nobody leaves. You may wonder what requires that much security. You might think that whatever's down there can't be human, and you'd be right. I can't tell you much about the organization I work for, but they refer to themselves as the International Fey Relations Bureau, or FRB for short. I legitimately do not know the overall scope of their work. They're good about keeping things quiet, but what I do know is that they deal with the supernatural. Monsters, demons, fae, gods, it all falls under their umbrella, and ASP is where they keep the ones who prove to be problematic. Most of the unusual things in this world are content to keep to themselves. My understanding is that there are far fewer of them than there are of us and most of my colleagues, and I agree that they're certainly on the decline. It's why the FRB is eager to study them, especially those they have in captivity, and that is where I come in. I'll admit it. I took the prison job to satisfy my own curiosities. Despite my position as a consultant with the FRB, I'd still had only fairly limited experience with the supernatural. Aside from a few strange people I'd sometimes run into at their southwestern branch who most likely weren't entirely human, I'd never seen any of the things we'd researched firsthand. The closest I'd ever really come was when my dad passed away, and even then, I never got a good look at whatever it was that killed him. I only knew that it wasn't human and that it wasn't an animal. That was what brought me to the FRB and ultimately what led me to ASP. I'd been reading about these things for years. I'd seen footage that most people would never get the chance to see, but I'd never actually laid eyes on anything truly supernatural. This job was my chance not only to get my hands in the dirt and interact with them, but I'd be learning about them too. Maybe I could even find ways to keep people safe from them. You can't imagine how exciting of an opportunity it was. It really did feel almost like something out of a dream. I'm sure that on my first day working at ASP, I was the only person walking into that dreary place with a legitimate smile on my face. I was met at the door by a tall and heavy-set man with dark skin and kind eyes. He had a warm but tiny smile that seemed just a little out of place given everything I knew about Ashurst. "Dr. Berry," he said, obviously recognizing me as he went in for a handshake. "Welcome to Ashurst. It's nice to finally meet you. The name's Bob Hitch. The warden asked me to meet you here. It's nice to be here," I replied, trying to match his smile. He had an absolutely crushing handshake that didn't last for long. "Well, I'm glad you think so. This wasn't an easy position to fill. Ashurst doesn't exactly have the greatest reputation in the first place. I'm sure you can imagine why. I've heard some rumors," I said as he led me inside. Bob flashed his keycard to one of the guards in the front entrance, who gave him a nod. He turned down a sterile hallway lit with fluorescent lights, and I followed him closely. "A lot of them are true," he said. "We don't typically deal with Gen Pop, but you'll still see and hear things. Part of the job, I'm afraid." "It can't be as bad as the inmates we're dealing with downstairs," I replied, half joking. Bob didn't seem amused. "You'd be surprised and disappointed to know just how similar the two are," he replied. Up ahead was a barred metal door that we stopped in front of. Bob looked up at a security camera in the corner of the ceiling and flashed a weary smile before a buzzer sounded and the door opened. We walked past a security booth where Bob stopped to show his ID to the guard there. He didn't respond to Bob's comment before he buzzed us through another door that led to a steel elevator door. "I assume you've been briefed on our security protocols here, correct?" he asked as we approached the elevator. He scanned a different keycard to summon it. I was, yes. The keycards, the concrete, the surveillance. Good. Saves me that part of the tour. He gestured for me to step into the elevator and pressed his thumb against a pad to be scanned before we descended. The ride down felt longer than it should have, but maybe it was just my nerves. "You'll be joining our research team, working under Dr. Jason Hendricks. He's all right." For the most part, they observe the behavior of our inmates, although on occasion you'll be asked to interview some of the more talkative ones, under supervision, of course. "Some of the shit we've got down here is a whole new kind of dangerous. Best not to take any chances." "Of course," I said, and paused for a moment before asking, "How long since you've had a major incident, like an escape?" "Never. We've had a few attempts and we've had to put down a few of the more determined ones. But that's it. Our warden has one hell of a record when it comes to safety. She takes a lot of pride in that." Elizabeth Parker, yes, she's been running this place for almost 35 years. I think she's been the one in charge ever since they opened it up. It might be best to let you know up front that she's not entirely human. Vampire. You know how it is. "Wait, so the warden is an actual vampire?" I asked, a little surprised. That hadn't been mentioned in the brief I'd gotten. "That she is. I figure the FRB thought it might look better to have someone who wasn't fully human running the show down here. It's probably for the best. A lot of our staff are also either Fae or empowered humans. Werewolves, vampires, mediums. Best to fight fire with fire, right?" "So, what are you?" I asked, almost a little cautiously. "I'm the head of the research division." "Right, got it," I said with a nod before the elevator doors opened. I was greeted by the sight of another sterile hallway, although this one seemed a lot busier. Bob checked us in at a security checkpoint in front of the elevator door before a final barred door opened to allow us into the hallway itself. "Welcome to the basement, Dr. Barry," Bob said as we stepped through. "Let me introduce you to the team." My first few weeks at ASP went about as well as I'd hoped they would. There was a slight adjustment period, to be sure. Having never seen any actual Fae or supernatural beings before, it was hard to figure out who was what. Just about everyone passed for a normal human at a glance, but in time I did start to pick up on the subtleties that set them apart. Most of the guards were werewolves. You could usually tell by how chummy they were with everyone. I would have thought they'd have some sort of pack mentality, but if anything, they were just high energy and sociable. It turns out that werewolves are actually just really nice people, and that is not a sentence I ever thought I'd get to say. A lot of my co-workers on the research side ended up being vampires. They were a little easier to pick out, namely because the stereotypes are mostly true. They were pale, usually quiet, and kept to themselves. I never saw any of them eat, either, although I also never saw any of them bite anybody. I still don't actually know how they feed, and I don't really want to ask. The Fae and mediums were harder to pick out. Sometimes I'd catch a coworker moving something without touching it, or I'd see something a little strange and that would give it away. But without that, it was never obvious. Even if I couldn't figure out with perfect accuracy just who was what, it didn't make the overall experience any less exciting. For the first time in my life, I saw the creatures I'd been researching for years up close, and it was both breathtaking and disturbing. I'm not at liberty to share most of it, and what I could share would fill up pages and pages. There was so much and it was beautiful. It was everything I'd ever wanted, and I suppose I really should have known better. Maybe then I wouldn't have been stupid enough to try and talk to Vikram. I suppose it's an inherent flaw of humans to want to categorize things into neat little boxes, isn't it? Maybe it's just some doomed desire to understand that which we cannot comprehend. Either way, the FRB is just as guilty of that little sin as the rest of humanity is. They categorize entities into 5 classes. Class 1 entities aren't dangerous. They're either small enough to pose no danger or outright benevolent. Things like mediums and most ghosts, for instance. Class 2 entities are actually dangerous, but only incidentally. Things like some of the more predatory fae or ghouls. Sure, they can kill you, and some of them might just do it because they can. But they aren't outright looking to hurt anyone. Class 3 entities are dangerous on a larger scale. Things like more powerful forms of fae and whatnot. Generally, the FRB had to put them down when they encountered them, although a few still ended up in containment. A lot of what was held at the prison were either these or Class 2 seconds. Class 4 is where it gets interesting. These are the things that could probably wipe out humanity if they were left to their own devices. I could only think of a couple of Class 4 seconds who were held in ASP, and even then they were held under the strictest of containment protocols. Then last but not least came the Class 5. Class 5 is reserved for the things that would flat out destroy the world as we know it if given the chance. 9 times out of 10, these were gods. I'd only ever heard rumors of Class 5 entities and never actually encountered one. I doubted I'd ever come close to doing so at ASP either. How exactly does one build a prison for a god? Technically, there's also a Class 6, but that's reserved for only 4 known entities who are quite literally the greater gods that hold reality together. I won't get into those. If you can't imprison a Class 5, you're not going to do shit against a Class 6. So why bother even talking about it, right? Anyways, Vikram was a Class 4 entity. He was what most people call an old fae, an ancient, corrupted dryad with quite a lot of power. From what I've read about the old fae, they're technically just a few steps down from being gods, and each can be contacted in their own special way. For the weaker ones, you just need to make your way through the woods and follow the right path. But for the more powerful ones, well, let's just say it gets complicated. Human sacrifice levels of complicated. Most old fae are considered Class 3 at worst, but Vikram was a special exception. As old fae went, he was one of the more powerful ones. If I recall correctly, performing his ritual had involved carving an ocarina out of the skull of an infant and playing it in a special clearing. He was brought into captivity after dragging a small town into whatever weird dimension the old fae typically hide in, and keeping them there for a few centuries just for shits and giggles. Since the FRB had no idea on how to kill an old fae, they'd opted to contain him. I guess it wasn't all bad. Supposedly, Vikram could have answered a lot of lingering questions we had about dryads and the old fae if he'd wanted to. But that was sort of where the problem started. He didn't want to. I first saw old Vikram about 3 weeks after starting at the ASP. Dr. Hendricks had put me on a team to analyze the footage from his cell. The whole point had been to take notes on his reactions to certain substances he'd been exposed to. I suspect the whole idea had been to see if anything we tried could actually hurt him, but neither Dr. Hendricks or any of my co-workers ever said that out loud. I remember the first time I saw him on a recording. My team and I had set up a television in a quiet boardroom. The week before, a small team of guards had attempted maintenance on old Vikram's cell using a solution of vinegar and salt water. I'm not sure where they'd come up with the idea, but I suppose it was worth a shot. The footage we were shown depicted a few men in hazmat suits entering the cell through the airlock. Old Vikram himself wasn't even visible on the screen. Someone else had told me before that he didn't like being seen, but even if he wasn't visible, there was evidence that he was there all right. You could see the dense foliage growing from the back of his cell towards the airlock. Spreading plant life is something that dryads just sort of do, and the old fae are no exception. I watched as the men in the suits sprayed down his foliage before they retreated out the airlock unmolested. I'll admit, given everything I'd read about things like old Vikram, I hadn't expected him to just let them leave. But I suppose this was a more controlled situation than what one might find out in the wild. From there, we watched to see if the vinegar solution had any effect on his foliage. Boring stuff, really. I wish I could say that it wasn't a complete waste of time, but it absolutely was. Salt and vinegar, various types of weed killer, new variations they developed. None of it worked. Even if it normally should have killed the plant life in there, it didn't do jack shit as long as he was in there. Old Vikram was content to ignore them, and they kept away from the back of his cell where he was hidden amongst the foliage. His camouflage was damn good too. Looking straight into his cell, it was impossible to see him. The only way we knew he was even still in there was because of some of the readings from inside the cell confirming that something was definitely alive in there. I remember it was after about a week of watching the security team waste their time and hours that I finally asked Hendricks the million-dollar question that had crossed my mind. You guys ever think to just interview the big guy? We'd been reviewing one of the last rounds of testing that had utilized a variant of Agent Orange that some idiot had modified to be even more dangerous, and I'll admit that my question mainly came from a place of frustration. What, old Vikram? Hendricks asked, looking over at me. He scoffed. Old Fae like him aren't known to be all that talkative unless you've got something to offer them. So, what have we got to offer him, then? It's not a question of we. It would probably depend on who's doing the interviewing. Old Fae always want something personal. Something of value and not always something tangible. They might take years off your lifespan or memories of the people you love most. Dealing with them is risky. Interviewing him could end very badly. I take it that nobody's volunteered, then. I asked, nobody's that stupid, Barry. Maybe I shouldn't have taken that as a challenge. Not to speak out of turn, but we're not exactly getting very far by watching the guards spray him with chemicals. I dunno, maybe it's time to try a different approach. I mean, if at first you don't succeed, sometimes you just redefine success. Hendricks raised an eyebrow. And you think trying to talk to him is going to yield results? Well, it can't hurt to try. I'll do it myself if I have to. Consider me your first volunteer. I knew that Hendricks wasn't taking me completely seriously, but I was about as serious as a heart attack. All right then, he finally said, tell you what. I'll have a word with Warden Parker. See if I can't get her to sign off on this. Then we'll talk about getting you in there. That was the best possible news I could have heard. Thank you. I'll do what I can to get something out of him, I promise. Hendricks still didn't look sold, but I couldn't have cared less. I'd already gotten everything I wanted out of him. It was a few days later that I got a visit from Warden Parker. It was fairly late in the evening. Most of the team had gone home. I'd stuck around to finish a report on an interview I'd had with another inmate when I heard the door to the lab close suddenly. The sound had made me jolt upright, and when I looked, I could see the figure of a woman standing by the doorway. She was tall and slender with a pressed tan suit that fit her loosely. She wore a wicker cowboy hat on her head and aviator sunglasses, giving her a strange modern cowgirl look that seemed a little out of place at the Asp. That said, I knew who she was the moment I saw her. When she walked towards me, she moved with the smooth grace of a dancer. Dr. Stephen Barry, she said, her voice low and almost condescending. Yes, that's me, I said. Warden Parker, I presume. The very same. I hear you're the one looking to chat with old Vikram. I am, yes. She took off her aviators and hung them off her shirt. Beneath them, her eyes were a cold blue. Well, son, you've either got massive balls or a death wish. I thought I'd stop by to find out which it was. She stopped a few feet away from me, studying me carefully and sizing me up. Dr. Hendricks said that you'd never tried getting someone in there to talk with him before. I thought a change in approach might be smart. I said, Hendricks and his team have never tried. Bob and I, on the other hand, have. I'll admit, this was before Hendricks' time. He may look old, but I'm much older and Bob's been here with me since day one. Old Vikram was one of our original residents and the FRB wasn't quite as smart back then, but I digress. Someone's already tried to talk to him. It didn't go well. If you don't mind, may I ask what happened? The warden smiled, showing off gleaming white fangs. I was kinda hoping you would. Mind if I borrow your computer, Doc? She shooed me out of the way and I gave up my chair for her. We were hoping to get some actual results, so we had everything recorded. I doubt you'd have the clearance to access those files. But I do. Just give me a sec." She closed out of my report and instead opened up a Dropbox folder. Within a few minutes, she'd found the video she was looking for. It looked old. The footage was grainy and colorless, but I could recognize the image on the screen as Vikram's cell. The warden tilted my screen so I could get a better look before she played the video. I could see a man on the screen moving up towards a desk that had been set a safe distance back from the old Fae, who wasn't visible on the screen itself. A team of 4 guards, complete with riot shields, flanked him and took up a defensive position in front of him as he sat down. "Good morning, Vikram," he said. His voice was hard to make out, garbled and distorted by almost 40 years of wear. "How are you today?" There was no reply. "We have some questions we'd like to ask you, if that is acceptable." Still no answer. "Could you tell us more about you?" Still nothing. It was hard to make out the expression on the face of the man behind the desk, but I could see a quiet frustration on it. "Vikram, we have done our best to ensure your comfort. All we ask is that you cooperate with us. If you would prefer we use more difficult means, we are happy to do so, but we would prefer a more respectful and dignified approach." Vikram didn't say a word, but this time, at least he replied, in a sense. I could see the guards tensing up as something happened off camera. I could hear them yelling to each other before scrambling to retreat. The man behind the desk leapt up and stumbled backwards towards the door of the cell, but he wasn't fast enough. I could finally see what he and the guards saw as they shambled onto the camera. Long, grayish humanoid figures. Their bodies were skinny to the point where their ribs were visible against their skin. There were at least 6 of them, and they rushed forward, charging at the guards and quickly overwhelming them. The men didn't stand a chance as the creatures ripped into them with claw and tooth. The man who'd been behind the desk had made it to the door and pounded on it, screaming to be let out before one of the grayish humanoids pounced on him, forcing him to the ground as it began to bite at his face and his throat. His terrified struggles didn't last long. Within seconds, his arms had gone limp in death, and the only sounds I could hear from the video were the distorted screams of the creatures that Vikram had set loose. The warden stopped the video there. "Old Fae are remarkably powerful," she said plainly. "Even now, I doubt we know just how strong they really are. 50 years ago, we had no idea they could be captured. 40 years ago, we had no idea they could summon packs of ghouls out of thin air. 20 years ago, we had no idea he'd figured out how to open the door, and 5 years ago, we had no idea how he'd survived after we modified his cell to deprive him of air. It's taken a lot to keep old Vikram captive, and my top priority is finding a way to kill him, not to get his autobiography." "Those people in the video," I asked, "are they dead?" "Yes, we couldn't even retrieve their bodies, and I'd rather not have another incident like that. If I let you poke him, he'll kill you, and he'll kill whoever we send in with you." I was silent for a moment, at a complete loss for words. I hadn't imagined that he was truly that dangerous. I suppose maybe I should have known better, but what if I brought him something? I asked. "Old Fae love boons, don't they? Maybe if I bring him something, he'll give me something you can use to kill him." "What? Buy a method of execution off of the condemned?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are you crazy? I'm just trying to think outside the box here. If we give him something of value, he'll give us something, won't he?" I could see the warden thinking it over. "Unless you've got a better idea, it's worth a shot, don't you think?" I said. She just chuckled. "You don't give up, do you? Tell me something, doctor. Why do you want to get in there so badly?" "I just want results," I said. "I came here to study things like him up close and personal, and if I can help with this." The warden studied me quietly for a moment before deciding that my answer was good enough for her. She closed the video and got up. "All right then, I'm going to approve your request to speak with old Vikram. I assume you have some idea as to what you're going to give him in exchange for information." "I do," I promised her. "Let's hope it's good enough. I don't want to leave you to die in there. But if I have to preserve the safety of the others who work at this installation, I'll do it without a second thought. Good luck." Then, just like that, she was gone. When I was 8 years old, my dad bought me a model submarine. We'd spent the next few weekends working on it together, building it piece by piece. At the time, the complexity of it had been intimidating. The glue, the tools we'd needed, the engine. He'd told me it was just like a Lego set, but it had felt so much bigger than that. When we'd completed it, it was something greater than anything else I'd ever built. Just looking at the finished product had made me feel like I'd done something incredible. Like building that submarine had been what turned me from a boy into a man. Even after my father passed, it kept a special place in my heart and had consistently found its home in a place of honor on the various shelves of the various places I'd lived over the years. There was nothing I loved more than that little submarine because it reminded me of my dad. It reminded me of the best days of my life. I knew it wasn't going to be easy to part with it, but I was sure that this would be worth it. On the day that I was supposed to stare down old Vikram, I arrived at work carrying the submarine in my arms, cradling it like my own son. Bob met me at the door, just like he had on my first day there. "Morning, Dr. Berry," he said warmly as he held the door open for me. "Big day today, huh? Big day," I repeated, and I caught him looking at the submarine. I could see a hint of doubt behind his smile. "So, I take it that's your offering. It's the best thing I've got," I replied. "God, I hope so." Never seen the warden so antsy before. "I'm amazed you talked her into this." "You and me both," I said as we made our way down the hall. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't the least bit antsy myself, but I'd already made up my mind. Old Vikram's cell was one of the most high-security setups we had. It was away from the other cells and down a sealed-off hallway that could only be accessed from the outside. The door that separated it from the rest of the prison looked more like a massive vault door than anything else. It locked behind us as soon as we'd gone through. On the other side, I could see a control room that watched the inside of the cell through cameras and monitored both the vacuum-sealed state of the reinforced cell and several sensors to ensure that old Vikram was in there, even if they couldn't see him. I spotted Dr. Hendricks amongst the staff in the control room and traded a nod with him. Well, it's the man of the hour himself," I heard a voice ahead of us say. The warden waited by the small airlock that granted access to old Vikram's cell. It had been designed to be too small for him to fit through. "There's still time to back out if you're having second thoughts," she said. "Nobody here would blame you in the slightest." "And deny them a show?" I asked. "No, I'm as ready as I'm going to get." I could see her studying me, looking for some trace of a lie. "I'm not sure if she found one or not. I'll take it from here, Bob," she said. Bob just gave her a respectful nod, then patted me on the shoulder. "Good luck, friend," he said before heading off to the control room. The warden watched him go before her eyes returned to me. "We've sent some people in to set up a desk for you to sit at. I'd advise you stay at it. Whatever you do, don't cross the red line in the cell. If you sense anything out of place, leave immediately. If we can get you and your security detail out safely, we will. But in the very high possibility that we can't." "I understand," I said. "I really hope you do." She looked down at the submarine in my hands. I couldn't tell if it was a look of approval or not. Either way, she didn't comment on it. "I'll be out here. We'll be sending you in momentarily. I'll have Bob seal the blast doors on the control center and in front of the vault, then we'll send you in. If things go bad, we'll have to vacuum seal the cell again and if necessary, freeze it. If it's any consolation, it'll kill you quickly assuming you're not already dead. Hopefully I'll see you on the other side, but if I don't, it was nice knowing you." Likewise, ma'am." She cracked a small smile before gesturing to a group of 8 guards who'd been lingering nearby to join me. Just like the ones in the video, most of them were equipped with riot shields, although I spotted 2 men with full-on flamethrowers. A klaxon alarm sounded as large metal doors closed over the entrance to the control room and the vault that led to the rest of the prison. My guards took their places by the airlock and entered first. The warden watched quietly before nodding at me to go inside after them. The door of the airlock closed and sealed behind me with a hiss, and I could feel the air around me change to become colder and more humid. The first thing I noticed when the airlock opened to allow us into the cell was the smell. It was moist, earthy, and a little sour. My security team fanned out around the desk that had been set out for me and took up their positions. Once they were there, one of the men with a flamethrower gestured for me to join them. I'd never actually seen the full scope of old Vikram's cell before. All I'd seen was the video taken from one of the cameras in the corner. It seemed so much bigger in person, like a school gymnasium. The far wall looked overgrown with vegetation and parts of trees that should not have been able to grow down there. It was impossible to see anything clearly amongst it, but I knew that old Vikram was there. Even without seeing him, I could feel him watching me. Slowly, I approached the desk and set my submarine down onto it before taking a seat. I cleared my throat, struggling for a moment to find my voice before at last I was able to speak. "Good morning, Vikram," I said softly. "I've come to you with an offering, something that means everything to me. I'd like the opportunity to speak with you, if you'll permit me that." My voice echoed off the walls, and at first, there was no response. I only stared ahead at the dimly lit wall of vegetation, looking for some other sign of life or movement. For a moment, I began to wonder if I'd wasted my time. What if he didn't accept my offering? What if he didn't even want to speak with me? Then I saw it. The leaves on the far end of the room shifted. What I thought was just the bark of some impossible tree twitched and creaked as it moved. At first, it was impossible to make out the shape of its body. Limbs that seemed impossibly long detached from the wall, although I couldn't tell what was supposed to be an arm and what was supposed to be a leg. A large shape I'd initially mistaken for a burl of bark detached from the wall and turned to look at me. In the low light, I could see a skull-like face on it with pale, beady eyes that watched me closely. "An offering, how very quaint," a voice hissed as old Vikram revealed himself to me. His body seemed to be made of twisted, gnarled wood with branches and leaves jutting off of it. His limbs seemed impossibly thin, and yet he carried himself on all fours like a predator. "Too long has it been since one has offered tribute, and never before has one of your kind offered it." The voice was a low, serpentine hiss, like the sound of wind through the breeze. I could hear the groan of creaking wood in his voice as he surveyed me and my guards, seeming almost amused by the sight of them. "What is your game, human? What is it that you seek?" "Just to learn," I said quietly, "more about you, more about your kind. So coy you are. Very well. Your offer is accepted. Too long has it been since I've had someone to talk to." I pushed the submarine towards the edge of the desk and watched as old Vikram outstretched a gnarled hand to reach for it. I could see my security team tensing up, anticipating an attack, but they held their fire as Vikram took the submarine. As his fingers closed around it, I could swear that I saw grayish flesh in between the wooden carapace on his hands. It had a sickly sweet, moldy smell to it. "What was it you wanted to know, human?" I asked. "Let's start with the old Fae like you. What are you, exactly? Where did you come from?" "Where? From the earth, as all things are. Even you. We are those who survived you. We are those who sought refuge from your kind, moving into deeper and darker places, adapting to it as need be." "You are seeking refuge from us?" I asked. "Need I explain why? Our kinds have never been fated to live in harmony. In generations past, you feared us. You told stories of us in reverence and dread. You avoided the woods that we claimed as home. Then as time moved on, you changed. You pushed deeper into our homes, fueling your own development, your own growth. Perhaps in time, you shall fear us again, and we shall retake our place as that which you fear. We shall see. So we were killing you off." I said, "How? We can't seem to destroy you now." "You think yourself clever," Vikram scoffed. "We've only just begun, and now you've shown your true intent. Typical of a human. I and those like me have surpassed death. My heart is gone away, far from here, and so I shall not die. Not to you. Your efforts only waste your time. I shall confess, I have enjoyed this unending life I have earned, even locked in here by you and your kind. At the very least, my future is assured, unlike yours or your father's." I caught myself tensing up. It shouldn't have surprised me that he'd mentioned my father. I'd given him something so important to our relationship. But the very mention of him caught me off guard all the same. My apologies. I know you miss him," Vikram crooned. "I imagine you'd give anything to see him again. To say goodbye, wouldn't you?" I hesitated before finally answering. "If I ever had the chance, yeah, maybe." I knew I was playing with fire. I knew that. I'm not sure what I was thinking, even bothering to humor him, but I did it anyway. "All it would cost is a few years. You've been so kind as to humor me with some conversation. I can be generous. A few twilight years. for a chance to say goodbye, my gift to you. I knew it was a mistake. I knew that. But looking at the thing before me, I figured I had nothing to lose. All right, I finally said, take what you need. I was sure I saw a gleam in Vikram's pale eyes. He turned away from me to look back towards his wall. Very well, then, from the leaves he'd left on the wall, I could see something moving. Something in the shape of a man shambled out, stumbling on unsteady legs like a foal. Even in the low light, I recognized its face. It was my father. I could hear Vikram chuckling, a low, ominous sound that filled the room. The thing that was my father approached us on unsteady legs, its skin grayish and pale. I could see it studying us before I heard a klaxon alarm. Wait, I called, but I was too late. The ghoul in the shape of my father let out an inhuman snarl and made a charge for one of the nearby guards. It crashed against his riot shield, clawing at it as several more creatures just like it, all with my father's face emerged from the brush and charged for us. One of the guards with a flamethrower opened fire, setting ablaze the creatures as I stumbled back, away from my desk and through the door of the airlock. Two of the guards who'd accompanied me covered me, coming in with me as the rest put down the twisted monsters that Vikram had summoned. His laughter echoed off the halls, cold and menacing. I should have known better. The warden says I'm lucky that I'm still alive. I know she's right. I had a moment of weakness, and it nearly got me, and my security team killed. Thankfully, aside from a few injuries, nobody died. I think that's the only reason I wasn't fired. That, and the fact that I really did get something out of old Vikram. He'd mentioned his heart. He hadn't said much, but he'd said enough. Maybe if we find that heart, we can destroy it and we can kill him. It's just a theory, but it's better than nothing. Now all I need is something to offer old Vikram, so he'll tell me exactly where to find it. Thanks for tuning into our scary story today. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more spooky tales like this one. Until next time, stay safe and keep your lights on at night.